My guest at this time is Jonathan Scruggs. He's a senior counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom. He joins me today to discuss the latest legal battle involving Jack Phillips, the devout Christian and owner of Masterpiece Cake Shop in Colorado. You may remember that last year the Supreme Court sided with Mr. Phillips, ruling that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission did not demonstrate religious neutrality when it accused him of violating the civil rights of a same-sex couple that asked him to design a custom cake for their wedding. Since then, Phillips has been the target for more legal action. The latest incident is his refusal to design a cake celebrating the coming out of a transgender person. After initially getting involved, the state of Colorado this time has decided not to continue with this case. And Jonathan, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, let's back up to begin with to what happened after the Supreme Court acted, because based on what I've read, this transgender customer is not the only one who came to Mr. Phillips asking him to create a cake which they should have been fairly certain he wasn't about to create. What has been the story for Mr. Phillips over the past year or so?
Yeah, at this point, it really has been a story of harassment because Jack has received all these different types of requests, particularly from this one lawyer that you mentioned, but from other people too, really that are meant to harass him. Things like celebrating Satan's birthday or other obscene requests that no person in really would want to create. But that just highlights how important these issues are, and it emphasizes that really, Jack, all he wants to do is go and live his life. He just wants to operate his business in accordance with his faith. He didn't sign up for any of this, but he's having to, go through these difficult times, receiving these requests, being sued multiple times, even though he's been vindicated by the U.S. Supreme Court.
What are the facts of this particular case?
Sure, and I think it's helpful to provide context. As you noted before, there was that one initial incident where Jack politely declined to create a cake celebrating a same-sex wedding ceremony. That went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and he won. But during that process, this lawyer, the same lawyer, asked Jack to create a cake celebrating the person's gender transition. Jack politely declined, or the cake shop politely declined that. And again, the government sued, but the government quickly dropped its suit after we filed a countersuit against the government. So the government didn't want to touch this, the state of Colorado. But now that attorney who didn't like the result of that case has filed suit against Jack and is seeking attorney's fees and damages that really could put Jack in a very difficult financial situation. Really, his livelihood is on the line.
Talk about the state of Colorado's role in this. The Civil Rights Commission has not been a friend, clearly, to Mr. Phillips, but ultimately they decided not to stick with this case. Why?
Well, I think it's because they saw the tea leaves, and the U.S. Supreme Court really had strong words against the state of Colorado the first time. Then we found other evidence indicating that the new officials on the commission, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, who's often responsible for investigating these claims, they really doubled down on inappropriate comments made by Colorado officials. So they said at first they wanted to pursue this case, but then we had to file a lawsuit in federal court. We uncovered some of those statements, and they dropped that case, which led to this lawyer who didn't like that result to go turn around and file his own lawsuit. It's important to stress in all these matters, Jack Phillips is willing to serve all people. He just doesn't convey certain messages, and that's how all creative professionals operate. All creative professionals, no matter what their beliefs are, create certain things and don't create certain things. But it's about what that message is, not who asked for it. And Jack is really living by that same principle, as everyone should have that freedom to do so.
Where does this case stand right now, and what comes next?
Well, the lawsuit was just filed in Colorado State Court, I think it was on June 5th. Now we get to file a response to that, and we're looking forward to doing so, because really if you set this case in this type of factual context, I don't think any reasonable person could miss what's going on here. The type of harassment that Jack is facing, the fact that Jack has been vindicated multiple times already, and once involving this exact same factual scenario. So we're very hopeful that Jack's rights will be vindicated again, and really the rights of all Americans to live out their faith.
We're talking with Jonathan Scruggs. He's a senior counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom. And Jonathan, we mentioned at the top that last year at the Supreme Court, almost exactly 1 year ago, June of 2018, Mr. Phillips and you won at the Supreme Court. But it was a narrow ruling in the sense, not by the margin, it was a 7-2 decision, but narrow in the sense that the ruling only applied to his particular case. Obviously, folks probably on both sides of this issue are looking for a point when the Supreme Court will actually issue a ruling on the larger debate, which is whether or not a person has the freedom of conscience to deny a particular customer, a particular product or service. So are you somewhat frustrated that the court was more narrow last year than it could have been, or is that the right place for this debate to be right now?
Well, I think the court took the facts as it came to it, and the facts of kind of the egregious statements and activity that the state of Colorado engaged in made that case an easy one. And that ruling has will protect others because often government officials apply these rules inconsistently, or they make statements that are improper. And so Masterpiece is going to have the ruling in the Masterpiece case will have a large impact. But to your point about the larger free speech ruling, this is a vitally important principle that does need to be decided and is being litigated all across the country. We represent an art studio here in Phoenix, a film studio in Minnesota who's undergoing the same type of issue. And, again, it's something that all Americans should be invested in because whether you agree with same-sex marriage or not, everyone should agree that the government shouldn't be forcing someone to convey a message they disagree with. And the government that can do that on one topic can do it on other topics too. So we do look forward, and we fully expect that at some point soon the U.S. Supreme Court will take one of these cases and decide this issue.
Well, the Supreme Court may end up deciding that issue fairly soon, given the number of cases, and you're involved with a number of them. I know you're working with Barronelle Stutzman and Arlene Flowers out there in Washington State. But right now, legislatively, there's a bill called the Equality Act that has passed the House of Representatives. It's unlikely to get very far in the Republican-controlled Senate or certainly across the desk of President Trump. But part of this Equality Act, which claims that LGBT and transgender folks, they need to have the same protections as folks based on race, religion, ethnicity, and that sort of thing. And one of the provisions in this bill is the eradication of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was from the 1990s and is largely the underpinning of the legal case you're making with these clients here. So what do you make of this debate?
Yeah, it's definitely a dangerous bill that can really have a lot of negative ramifications for people's freedom of speech, freedom of association, their religious freedom. I just think of one example that comes to my mind is we represent a women's shelter in Alaska that takes women in who have been battered or abused in the past and offers them a safe space to live and interact with each other. But there, a similar law like the Equality Act, it's on the local level in Anchorage, essentially tried to force the women's only shelter to admit biological men, essentially forcing these biological women to sleep right next to a man even though they might have been abused the night before. And so it really comes down to protecting women, to protecting those who are often in dangerous situations. And that's the kind of ramification that the Equality Act could have. Do you want to make that on a national level where it really puts the rights and safety of these people at risk?
Thank you very much for being with us today and helping us understand particularly the Phillips case and where the larger debate is headed as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You bet. Jonathan Scruggs, Senior Counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.